Okay, so what we're going to be talking about tonight is more of these modifier edit commands. So we're going to be working in this area tonight. And again, you need to recognize the fact that you also need to know how to select objects, which I think most of you are probably okay with, and as well as using OSNAPs, which are down here. Okay, so those are always going to be important when you're doing any kind of modification. Okay, so we've covered some modify commands already. We've done the move and the copy. I believe we did fillet. So there's a lot of other ones in here that we're going to take a look at. So the first one I want to take a look at is one called chamfer. And a chamfer is it's kind of like a fillet, except the difference is what a fillet's going to do for you is give you an arc between two objects, and what a chamfer will do is give you a straight line. So you don't see chamfers as much in a working kind of thing as much as you would fillets. Fillets are very common. So when you look around to see any kind of design, you're going to see fillets all over the place. But chamfers are going to be a little bit less useful. So the chamfer command is buried underneath the fillet command. So if you click on the fillet, open that up, you'll see there's your chamfer command. So in order to do this, what we'll do is we'll do a couple of objects. So let's go ahead, we're going to place some objects down, like say one here, like that. Then I'm going to put another line here. Okay. And if you want, you can put a polyline down, just give it some vertexes. It's going to function very similar to the way the fillet works. Okay, so it's going to have a lot of the same kind of sub options associated with it as well. So if we go to the chamfer command right here, okay, notice select first line or, and then you have all of these sub options here. And up above, it'll talk about distance 1 and distance 2. So what this is going to do is it's going to go to the intersection and it's going to cut back whatever that distance is, and it's going to do the same thing to this, and it'll put a line between those. So distance 1 references the first object you pick, distance 2 references the second object you pick. Notice in my case, distance 1 and distance 2 are set to zeros. So what we're going to do is go in there and we're going to click on the distance sub option, and we're going to put in a value for distance 1. So I'm going to put in 1 for distance 1 and then hit enter. And for the second one, I'm going to put in a 0.5. So they don't have to be the same, but you have to have two values. So you can't have like one a value and one a 0. So they either have to both be zeros or they have to be both values greater than 0. So once I enter that, then again, I just pick the first object, pick the second object, and you can notice it's going to show me how it's going to chamfer that. And notice because I picked the first object, that's where it's using the 1 unit there. So if I click that, it'll do that, and this just trims it off. So it gives you that sharp corner, okay? So instead of that tangent arc, it's this kind of structure here. So that's all there really is to it. So you could use chamfer like you can a fillet. If you do set your distances to zeros, what it'll do is a trim and extend. So I don't think it's as convenient as using the fillet, but if I go to chamfer, set my distance up to 0 for the first one, 0 for the second, then when you pick, notice what you're going to get is a trim or an extend depending on how you pick it, okay? So if I pick that one, it did a trim for me. Is everybody getting that to work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, it's not a super, it's just not used as much in design, so you're probably not going to have the occasion to use it that much. In fact, a lot of times I don't even see the chamfer until I've already done it another way. So, all right, let's look at the polyline option. If we go to chamfer, there's a polyline. Well, let's set our distances up first. let's set the distance up to, the first distance is 1, and you can make the second distance 1 if you'd like. So if we go to the polyline option and you click on your polyline, notice what it does is it just chamfers every vertex that it can. Now, if the vertex can't fit the chamfer, it doesn't do it. So I think there was 1 or 2 vertexes where it wasn't able to do that. Okay. So again, that's not like a super useful tool, but there you have it. Okay. Any questions on that?
No.
Nope.
Okay, cool. So let's go ahead. We'll just delete what we've got here. I'm just gonna do an erase all and enter. Okay. So the next command we're going to look at is extend. And extend and lengthen and trim and break, they're all somewhat related, but they do operate a little bit differently. So extend is going to have to use a minimum of 2 objects. Okay. So you have to have an object to extend as a boundary, or an object to extend, and then you have to have an object to extend it to. Okay, so you have to have a minimum of 2 objects when you use the extend command. So let's do this. We're going to draw some objects here, and just kind of, it just doesn't have to look exactly like mine, but just I'm going to draw a line right here. And then I'm going to have another line like this. Now notice what I'm doing, I'm pointing it this way, but I'm not crossing it, okay? I'm going to do another one over here like that. And I'm going to do an arc, something like this, okay? So basically, any object that has an endpoint is an extendable object, okay, first off. So not all objects will extend. So circles obviously won't extend, points won't extend. If you were doing text, that won't extend. But these are objects that all have endpoints to them, okay? So when you do the extend command, it's kind of tricky. What most people do is they'll start selecting what they want to extend. So let's say I want to extend that and that and that. I'm going to go pick that first, and that's not the way to do it. You have to select the boundary edge first. So this guy would be considered my boundary edge. And then you select the objects to extend, okay? So everybody always wants to do it backwards, but just remember, we're going to kind of reverse that. So we're going to go into the extend command, and it's buried under here in the trim, right there. So notice what it asks you right now is to select the boundary edges. So that's kind of sneaky right there. It doesn't really, it's not real plain, but that's what it's saying. So this is the boundary edge. Now, you can have more than one boundary edge. So you can make everything a boundary edge, even the objects that you're going to extend, they can be boundary edges as well. But what we're going to do is we're going to be selective. We're just going to use this as the boundary edge, okay? Is everybody good on that?
Mm-hmm.
Notice also that once you do that, it still asks you to select objects. At this point, it's still asking you to select boundary edges. Okay, so what I need to do at this point to say I'm done selecting boundary edges, so I just hit enter. So now it says, okay, extend, and you can use either a fence or a crossing, but all you have to really do is just pick it with the pick box. So you just pick the pick box, you hit that, and then extends, you pick that with the pick box, okay? Is everybody getting that to work?
Yeah.
Okay, now try to extend this one over here. Did it extend like mine did?
No.
Did anybody's extend like mine did? Okay, there's a reason. Anybody know why this mine extended or how that extended?
No.
All right, if you look at this line that's highlighted, my boundary edge, this actually mathematically projects out. Okay, so what's happening is it's extending this object to the mathematical projection. Okay, so what I'm going to do is undo mine. All right, now what's happening here is there is something called an edge mode. Okay, if the edge mode is not turned on, it won't extend this out mathematically. So let's go to the edge option, and everybody's is probably set to no extend. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so what you want to do is turn on the extend option and then come over here and it should work for you.
Yeah.
Did that work?
Yes.
So that's a little toggle, and once it's turned on, it stays on. So obviously I used that before, okay? And usually by default it's turned off, and so that's why everybody pretty much experienced the fact that that wasn't turned on, okay? Is that working now?
Yep.
So there's also that little cool undo in here, so you can undo if you extended something you didn't want. You know, you can just undo it back. So you can always do that, extend, undo, okay? Now, there's a reason I drew this arc like this. If you were able to extend the arc here, that's fine, but try to do this and it won't let you extend, okay? Technically, that's a boundary, right? If this comes over, does everybody see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Anybody
Mhm.
know why this won't work? It's a little tricky aspect about AutoCAD. The reason it won't do this right here is because that would turn this arc into a circle, and AutoCAD will not let you turn an arc into a circle, okay? So I could undo that and do this, but I can't then do this, okay? So that's one little thing about AutoCAD that's somewhat unique. There's another program I've used called MicroStation, very, very similar to AutoCAD, and it'll let you do that. So you can turn an arc into a circle, but AutoCAD will not. So that's kind of one of my pet peeves, and it'd be nice to make them change that. Okay, everybody good on that? So you always select your boundary edge first, then the objects to extend, okay? And you can also make every object a boundary edge if you want to, okay? Is that good for everybody?
Yep.
Okay, we'll go ahead and we'll hit the escape key. So what we're going to do now is create a trim. So trim and extend are kind of just the inverses of each other. With trim, you have to have what's called a cutting edge. So that means an object has to cut through objects. So I'm going to get rid of this guy right here. And what I'd like you to do is draw a line, make sure it kind of cuts through objects like that, okay? So if objects don't physically cross that line, they will not trim, okay? They will not trim. Is everybody getting that?
Yeah.
So with trim, it's like extend in the fact that you have to select this thing called the cutting edge first. Okay, they call it a cutting edge instead of a boundary. And then you select the objects to trim, okay? So we select the cutting edge first, or what I always think of as the scissors. We select the scissors first, then we select the objects to trim. So we're gonna go back up here to the extend, open that up, we'll find trim. And notice when you do that, select cutting edges shows up here, but it's real sneaky. Again, you don't really read it, a lot of people. But what we're going to do is we're going to select this guy as our cutting edge, the thing that's cutting through everything. And it's still asking me to select cutting edges at this point. So if you're done, which we are, just go ahead and hit enter. So now then you can select an object to trim. So you just come up, if I select that one, it trims. If I select that one, it trims. If I select that one, it trims. Also, there's an undo. So you can undo and then say trim that side. Okay, is that working for everybody?
Yep.
Okay, so if I try to trim that, it won't let me. Does anybody know why?
That would be delete.
Well, true. And the answer is it's not crossing the trim boundary. Okay.
Oh.
Yeah. So if it doesn't cut, I mean, if it doesn't go through it, it's not going to trim. Okay. So, but your answer is totally correct. You would have to delete that at that point. Okay. All right. Any questions on that?
Nope.
All right. So let's hit the escape key, and I want you to do an undo so you get your original picture back. I'm going to show you something that's pretty cool about this now. So in AutoCAD now, basically the trim command and the extend command are one and the same. So if you start out in the trim command, you can go to the extend command just by holding the shift key, okay? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to the trim command, select the cutting edge again, and then hit enter, okay? Then notice I'm trimming, right? Trim. If you hold the shift key down and select that circle, it'll extend, okay? So if you trim it, shift, it'll extend. Is everybody getting that to work?
Yeah.
That's a really cool option, because what that basically says is that trim and extend, you can start out in either command and do both in the same command, and that's a very, very nice feature, okay? We seen how that works now?
Yep.
Okay, so let's go ahead and hit the escape key. I'm going to show you one other feature about this, which is really awesome. This is pretty cool. Go ahead and hit the escape key and do an undo, and we'll take it back to, whoops, take it back to the picture that we wanted to be under. Okay, I might have to do, okay, I want it back to that. Okay. Okay, is everybody good on that now?
Yeah.
So here's a really, really cool trick also with trim or extend. It works either way. Sometimes it's cool to select every object in your drawing as a boundary edge. So it can either be a cutting edge if you're in trim, or a boundary edge if you're in extend. So here's how you do that. Go ahead, it doesn't matter whether you're in trim or extend. I'm just going to go into the trim command. And when it asks me to select cutting edges, all you have to do is just hit enter. Okay. So notice now you don't have any blue selected line, because everything in there is a cutting edge. So if I come here and I hit that, notice it trims, and it trims because it's trimming between two objects. You seeing that?
Yeah.
So if I hit shift, now I'm extending, I'm extending, I'm extending, and then I release it, I'm trimming, shift, I'm extending. So I can go back and forth between a lot of different modes by having everything selected as a cutting edge, and then using the shift key when I want to go to either trim or extend, depending on which one I'm in. Is everybody seeing how that works?
Mm-hmm.
Anybody need to see that again? Okay. All right, so very useful tools. Now, what else have we used to do trims and extends with? What other command?
Billet.
Fillet, and also the one we looked at today was chamfer, okay?
Yeah.
Those will also do that, but they're not going to be as flexible as the trim or extend, okay? So if you just need to do a really quick, sometimes trim, that's why I'll use fillet with zero radius. But you know, if I have to do multiple trims, I'm going to use the trim command, because that's going to be a much better way of doing it, okay?
Yeah.
All right, so two other commands that are similar to trim and extend. One is called lengthen, and the other one is called break, okay? So there's some unique things about both of these, because they only work on a single object. So when you use either trim or extend, you have to have a minimum of two objects. You have to have a cutting edge and an object to cut, and for extend, you would have to have a boundary edge and an object to extend. So when you use lengthen, it only works on a single object. And that's also going to be true with break, okay? So we're going to go ahead and just, I'm going to hit the escape key to terminate anything that I'm in, and I'm just going to erase everything. So erase all, enter twice. And what we're going to take a look at first is the lengthen command. Now that one's not as commonly used, although it's actually a pretty good command. I use it pretty often actually, but it's under here in the modify section. You have to open up that little drawer, and underneath here, there's your lengthen command, okay? So this has several sub options to it, and it also works on only objects that have endpoints. So lines, p-lines, arcs, those kind of things will lengthen, okay? So lengthen indicates that it's actually extending the object, but you can actually use it as a trim. Okay, so I'm going to show you those two ways to use this command. Okay, so let's do this. Let's go ahead and put a line down. Just don't worry about how long it is. And you might want to also draw another object like an arc, just so we can see how these are working. Okay. So we're going to go into the lengthen command. And it should give you sub options, okay? First of all, it's saying to select an object, but right now we haven't done anything, so we need to know what we're doing. So first thing we have is what's called delta. Then you have percentage or percent, total, and dynamic. So you have 4 different options. So delta, what this is going to do is tack on a little piece. Actually, it's going to just extend that. It doesn't really tack on a piece, but for instance, if you wanted to have another inch on this, you could go into the delta mode, tell it 1 inch, you select it, and it just extends it out. If you enter delta as a negative value, it will trim. So we'll kind of show you both methods on that. That's a nice one. Percent is just saying if you want this to be 50% as big as it is, you can type in 50 and it'll take it and make it half or a quarter or 3/4. Okay. Total is really neat because you can take a line or an arc or whatever that's any size, and you can say, well, I want that to be exactly 5.2 units. Set it to a total value of 5.2, and it'll either extend that or trim it depending on which way it needs to go. Okay. And dynamic is a way of kind of just dragging it where you want to go. So I don't usually use that too much. I like delta, probably delta and total are the ones that I use the most. So let's take a look at the delta option, okay? So we're gonna go into delta, and it wants to know a delta value. So it's either gonna be delta in terms of length or delta in terms of angle. Now, angle only works with arcs, and what that's gonna do is extend that angle out, okay? So it'll increase that by a certain amount of angle. So we're gonna go a default value of 1 right there for distance, okay? So now you need to notice that where you pick, whatever end of this you pick, it's going to add it on that end, okay? So if I come here, it adds it. Come over here, it adds it. Come over here, it adds it. Everybody getting that to work?
Yep.
Pretty slick little tool. So let's see how we can make that work as a trim. So if we hit the escape key, go back into the lengthen command. Let's change our delta value to a negative. So if we say a -1, for instance, now come up here, it's trimming, it's trimming, it's trimming, trimming, okay? So that's also pretty neat the way that's working, just chopping off little pieces, okay? So either positive or negative values of delta, angle, or delta length, okay? Is that working?
Yep.
Okay, so let's check the next option on lengthen. Lengthen. We're going to this time go to total. So this is another one of my favorite ones to use is total. So I can say, hey, I want this thing to be exactly, let's say 5 units. So I would type in 5 here, and you pick the, now notice, I wanted you to notice if I pick this end, so what it's doing is it's extending mine out in this direction. It's holding this end fixed and it's extending it out that way. So what it's doing is it's holding the end of the line opposite to the one I'm selecting fixed. So notice if I come up here, it'll work the other way, okay? That's the reverse of the way delta works, okay? So you gotta be aware of that. So if you click on that, that thing is exactly 5 units long. If I click on that, the arc length of this is exactly 5 units long, okay? I love that little tool because I can take a line of any length and then I can just make it whatever I want it to be exactly. Okay. Any questions on that?
Nope.
Everybody getting it to work?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you probably won't use lengthen all that much, just to be honest with you. If you do have the occasion to use it, I actually find myself using it more than I actually used to when I originally was working in CAD. So it is a really good tool. So again, it's different from trim or extend because it works on a single object and it's working on a value of distance or angle, okay? All right, so let's take a look. We're going to take a look at break. Now, break does only what it says it will do. Basically, it's a trim. And when you do a break, it's kind of a weird tool, but what you have to do is you have to pick 2 points. And the first point is where the first break occurs, and the second point will be the second point of break. And if you're going to use this tool properly, you probably should be using OSNAPs. So I'm going to show you some good ways to do this. So we're going to hit escape. If you're still into the lengthen command, just hit the escape. And I'm going to go ahead and delete my arc over here, but I do want you to draw a circle for me. Okay, so you got a circle in place. Okay, and let's see. Got a circle and I've got a line, okay? All right, so break is also under this section. They actually have 2 breaks here. One called that's your traditional break. And then they have this other one that's called break at or break at point. I'm going to show you how to do this one separate instead of, you can use this little tool if you want, but this actually isn't a command. It's what they call a macro. So we're actually using this as the base command, okay? So we're going to go into the break command. And the first thing it's going to ask you to do is select an object. So notice it's a single object, so you can't select multiple objects. So if I go up here and select this line, where I select that line automatically becomes the first point of the break. And notice where I drag my cursor, that's going to be the second point of the break. So if I just eyeball a point right, let's say there, it just broke it between, okay? But that was a highly eyeballed job, so that wouldn't be a good method. Are you guys getting that break to work?
Yeah.
Okay, so go ahead. We're going to do an undo and repair that. And we're going to have a little bit more control on this now, okay? So what we're going to do this time is we're going to force the break point, the first break point where we want it to be. So under normal circumstances, when you use this command, it's going to use where you pick that object as the first point. And that's just anywhere you pick it. So it's not very specific. So what we're going to do is go back into the break command. Go ahead and pick that line again. But this time you should notice there's something called first point. If you select first point, it's going to say, okay, you don't want to use what you selected as the first point. You want something else. So what I'm going to do is say, I'm going to use an OSNAP and I'm going to shift, right click, grab mid, select my midpoint, and so now it's going to break it based on that. So if I snap from mid to end, I just broke that line exactly in 2. Okay? That's going to be a much, much better way of doing breaks. Did everybody get that to work?
Yeah.
So let's try circles. And circles and arcs are unique in the fact that they will break counterclockwise from the first point to the second point. Okay, so they always break counterclockwise from the first point to the second point. So you got to recognize that or reference that because you might get the wrong arc that results. So in this circle, we're going to be able to break this guy into an arc. So we're going to go into the break command. And I would like you to select the circle. And again, it's going to think, okay, notice as I drag it, it's breaking counterclockwise this way. If I go clockwise, notice what's happening. Okay, so it's kind of weird. So what we're going to do is go to first point, and we're going to do a shift right click to quadrant. I'm going to pick this quadrant here. So now I force that point to be the first point. I'm going to do another shift right click, and I'm going to go quadrant, and I'm going to do the top quad. And so what I did was broke that into a very nice arc. Does anybody know how big the angle is in that arc?
270.
At exactly 270, right? Because this quadrant was at 0, that quadrant is 90, so I just chopped out an exact 90-degree piece of arc. That's correct, okay? So that's really some of the best things that you can do with break, okay? Now, here is absolutely one of the coolest things you can do with break, and there is no other way to do this in AutoCAD. And that is to break an object such as this line at a point such that this object, when you break it, the two objects that result from the break, they're going to be touching each other endpoint to endpoint, okay? So again, you're going to be able to break this thing so that when you break it, you're not removing a little tiny piece between, okay? So they are going to actually be physically touching endpoint to endpoint, okay? So what we're going to do this, we're going to force the first point of the break equal to the second point or vice versa, okay? So let's go into this right here. We're going to go into break, select your object, select first point, let's select midpoint. Now, what we want to do is make the first point and the second point equal. So does anybody know how we can do that?
Just do midpoint twice.
We could. Okay, we could definitely do that, but there's a little bit of there's a little trick you can use. You can use the @ symbol because the @ symbol references your last point. So if you just hit Shift and the @ symbol and then hit Enter, you don't have to do the snap. Okay, so you could absolutely do another midpoint snap, but I could also just do what I did, and it doesn't look like it did anything. But if you notice, when I clicked on that, there's that, and there's that. Okay. And again, these guys are perfectly endpoint to endpoint. There's no other way in AutoCAD to do that, okay? So any object that has endpoints, that'll work on. Now, you couldn't do that on a circle because that would try to make a circle into a 360-degree arc. And again, AutoCAD doesn't let an arc be 360 degrees. It can be 359.99999, but not 360 ever, okay? Any questions on this?
Nope.
Okay, great. All right, so let's go ahead. We'll clean up things. Delete them. And we're going to go ahead and do zoom. I'm just going to zoom extents out. So the next command we're going to look at is called join. And join is cool. It does kind of two things. It takes objects that are touching endpoint to endpoint and it will stitch them together. And when it does that, it turns them into a P-line. So it's the easiest way to take an object that's a non-P-line and turn it into a P-line, but also bring them together. So there is a little thing that's important about this. So these objects have to touch endpoint to endpoint. So if they're just really like, if you zoom up real tight and they're not touching, they won't join. So if you do have objects that won't join, they're probably not touching endpoint to endpoint. So if I go in here and I draw a couple of lines, there's a line, 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 okay. Because of the way I'm picking these things, those are all touching endpoint to endpoint. I'm going to go ahead and do another line out here, and I'm just going to do it like that. Okay. So does everybody have some line work?
Yep.
By the way, you could also have arcs in here, so you could have a line to an arc because arcs can also be incorporated into polylines. So that definitely works as well. So under here we have the join option. I gotta figure, I think it's this guy. Yeah, there's the join option. So open up that little modify drawer. It's down here in that bottom section there. Okay, so this is join. So what it asks you to do is select your source object, and then it wants you to select the objects to join. And the easiest way to do that is just select everything with a crossing and then hit enter. And what it will tell you at the bottom is so many objects were converted to one polyline. Now in my case, it says one was discarded. And that reason this was discarded is because this wasn't touching endpoint to endpoint. But you'll notice when I click on this, that's now a polyline. And in fact, when I do my properties right there, it says, hey, that's a polyline. okay? So that's the easiest way to convert a non-polyline into a polyline. Any questions on that one?
Nope.
So if I truly wanted to get this guy to join this, what would I have to do?
Trim.
Yes. So, and I'd have to trim both of them, right? So
Yeah.
the easiest way to probably do that would be to go into the fillet command, make sure your radius is set to 0, and then select your polyline, and then that line. And what that'll do to you is not only do the trim, but it also did the join at the same time. Okay.
Yeah.
So I have had, anytime you try to join lines together, be on the lookout for the fact that you could have lines that you think are touching, but they might be crossing, or they might not be touching at all if you zoom up on them. But everything has to be touching endpoint to endpoint, otherwise it will not join. So that's your biggest criteria with the join option. All right?
Yep.
Okay. So we're going to take a look at 3 that are somewhat related. We're going to look at the rotate command, then we're going to look at the scale command, then we're going to look at the line command. And these are all really, really good little tools as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go ahead and blow my polyline out. And we're going to draw this little kind of flag. So what I'm going to do is draw this guy. Let's go ahead and draw him up like this, and then come down. And then I'm going to do a shift and do what's called a nearest OSNAP. So I'm going to just make that my little flag and then hit enter. So this is the shaft of my flag. This is my little flag right here. Okay. It doesn't have to look perfect, like it doesn't have to look like mine exactly, just so you get something that will be representative. Okay. All right, are we ready?
Yep.
Okay. So Craig, I guess you're speaking for the whole class. So what we're going to do is we're going to do this rotate, and rotate is located up here by the move command. So it's one of the more commonly used ones. So rotate, when you select it, it's going to ask you to select objects, and then it's going to ask you for what's called a base point. So once you selected all of your objects that you want to rotate and you base pointing is kind of like equivalent to sticking a pin where you want the rotation to occur. So I would stick my pin there, and that would be the point of rotation. I could stick it here. That would be the point of rotation. I could stick it here. But you really could actually have the point of rotation out here. So it doesn't have to be on the object. I would say probably 95% or 80%, or higher, it's going to be on the object somewhere. This is a command that mappers use quite a bit, because if you get a bunch of points that have the wrong bearing system on them, you need to rotate them into another system. Rotation is really, really an incredibly important command. What we're going to do is rotate this thing, and also keep in mind that rotation angles work like other angles in AutoCAD. If I want to rotate this thing up this way, that would be a positive rotation. If I want to rotate it this way, that's going to be a negative rotation. Okay? So we're going to go in and do the rotate, and notice it's going to ask you to select objects. So we're going to select everything that we want to rotate. Go ahead and hit enter after you selected it. And then it wants to have you specify a base point. And you don't want to just eyeball this. You want to OSNAP it, okay? Or you want to type in an exact coordinate depending on what your condition or your critical condition is. So I'm going to use an OSNAP. I think my OSNAP end is showing up. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure you get the OSNAP in. Once you do that, you click it. Notice now you're kind of in what they call a drag mode. So if I'm rotating it this way, that's a positive rotation. This would be a negative rotation, okay? Now, I can type in the exact value, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to type in 30 degrees. And what it did was it took the shaft value, whatever that was, and added 30 degrees to it, okay? So you have to know what your current angle is on your object and what you want it to be. And sometimes that has to be exact to like 14 decimal places. Again, particularly for mappers, that's a really, really important process. Did everybody get that to work?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so if we go the other way, it would be a negative rotation. So let's try something I want to show you. If we put a base point off of this, watch how this will rotate. So we got to rotate, select your object, hit enter, and this time put a base point over here somewhere. Notice how that's rotating completely differently because it's rotating based on that base point, okay? So you have to really, really be careful and think about where that base point is going to be, okay? That's probably one of the critical features. That and the fact that when you type in an angle down here, you better have it to the precision that you need it to be, because it can actually, you know, as it goes away from that point, things can get worse and worse and worse, okay? Does everybody see what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a thing that's interesting too in AutoCAD. We just rotated this thing an arbitrary 30 degrees, but let's say I don't know what my angle is, okay? I don't know what my angle should be, but I do know that I want the shaft of my flag to be exactly 90 degrees with respect to X. So what I can do is show AutoCAD that shaft, and that's basically what they call a reference, and then I can tell it what I want it exactly to be, and AutoCAD will go out and calculate for me the angle that it will use to do the rotation. So what we're going to do is go into the rotate this time, select the objects to rotate, we're going to base point it down here. Okay, so we're in that same mode, rotation, but notice there's one down here called reference. So what we're going to do is reference this, and you're going to show it the line that you want to reference. So what I'm going to do is snap it from here to here. So notice how this reacts a little bit differently now. Okay, is everybody getting that to work?
Yep.
So now it wants to know the new angle, and the new angle is the angle with respect to the x-axis, okay? So in this case, you would just type in 90 degrees, and you should now see that your flag is pointing straight up. So no matter what that angle that it was angled at before, AutoCAD calculated to you to 14 sig figs what it needed to rotate that thing up into a 90-degree orientation. So that's a really good option. And again, you probably use rotation angles more than reference, but it just depends on what you're doing. Okay? Any questions on that?
Nope.
Okay. All right, so the next one we're going to look at then, kind of similar to rotation in the way it works, not what it does, but how it works, is called scale. So scale is going to actually increase or decrease the object. Now, if you take your cursor with your mouse wheel, that looks like that's scaling the object, but all that's really doing is scaling the zoom, okay? What we're actually talking about is increasing the overall size of these selected objects or decreasing them depending on what's happening here. So like rotate, what we're going to do first is select objects to scale. Then we're going to give it a base point, and then we're going to give it a scale factor. So if your scale factor is greater than 1, it will increase the size of that object. If it's less than 1, it will decrease the size of that object. So you can think of it like a percentage. Also, where you pick the base point is critical, because if you pick a base point on the object, the coordinates of that base point will not move, but all the other coordinates of that will. And if you pick a base point over here, not only will this object change, but everything will translate. So I'll show you the difference. Okay, so we're going to go into scale. We're going to select our flag. Okay, once you're done selecting the flag components, go ahead and hit enter. Base point, again, depending on what you want to hold fixed. I'm going to hold this guy fixed right here. And Notice now, again, you're in a drag mode. As I drag it away, it's increasing. Notice the point of the base point, that's fixed. Those coordinates, X, Y, Z, are not changing, okay? So if we give it a factor of 2, my flag is gonna be twice as big as it was, but the coordinates X, Y, and Z did not change there. Did that work?
Yeah.
Okay, now I want to tell you something that this is a really good command and I use it a lot because if you share data with different professionals, sometimes some guys work in one term and some people work in another. So for instance, if I'm a mapper or surveyor like I am, I'm working in decimal units. So to me, 1 decimal unit is 1 foot. But an architect who I work with a lot, they work in real world units. So they work architectural units. So 1 foot in their system is actually 1 foot. So if I bring their information into mine, theirs is going to be 12 times bigger than mine, or mine will be 12 times smaller than theirs. So if I have a building that I want to put into a, let's say, a boundary, I could insert their building and then scale it down by a 12, and it'll perfectly be at the right scale. Or they could take my project and increase it by 12. Okay, so this is something that we do a lot. The other thing, you could convert, let's say, a metric kind of thing back into imperial by using the factor of a meter to a foot kind of thing. Okay, everybody kind of get the idea how this would work?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so scale also has a reference option. This one's pretty cool too, because let's say you want this shaft to be exactly, let's say, 2 inches tall. So I don't know how big it was when I drew it initially, but I can tell AutoCAD to scale it for me, and it will figure out the scale factor by referencing it. So we're going to go into the scale command. We are going to select our flag. We're going to hit enter. We're going to base point it right there. We're going to use reference, and we're going to pick from that point to that point. So what is literally doing is measuring the current size of that, and then it says, okay, what length do you want on that? And I'm going to say I want it to be 2 and hit enter. In my case, mine got really, really small, but if I list that object, you'll notice that thing is exactly 2 inches now. Okay, so that's also a really, really good tool, and it's highly useful. Okay, is everybody getting that to work?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's, one more thing before we leave the scale command. Let's see what happens when we don't put the base point on the object. So if we go into the scale command, select the objects to scale, and then we hit enter. So then we're going to go ahead and pick a point off to the side of it. Notice what happens as I drag it. Not only is it increasing size, but it's also translating. Everybody see that? So not only is it increasing or decreasing size, but it's also translating or moving, okay? So you have to be really careful because you could scale your drawing correctly, but you could translate it where it doesn't need to be translated. So that's a very, very important process as well, okay? That's why base point selection is so critical when you do both rotations and scales, all right? Any questions?
No.
All right, so I'm going to show you the ultimate command. This is one of my absolute favorite commands. It's highly, highly useful, and it actually kind of does like 3 things for you in one. So let's go ahead. We're going to delete our little flag, and I'm going to have you do a zoom extents for me. Just Z enter, E enter. Okay. We're going to go ahead and draw a diagonal line over in that right-hand corner. And I'm going to have you draw a rectangle in the top left-hand corner, just like that. Okay? So here's what I want to accomplish. I want you to put this rectangle so that this point right here is sitting on the midpoint of that line, and I want this face rotated with that face, okay? So what would we need to do that? How would we have to do that?
Would it be a move command?
It'd be a move first, right? So we'd have to go in and we do a move, we select the object, hit enter, give it a base point, give it a second point, and then I'm going to have to do what?
Rotate.
I'd have to rotate it, but in order to rotate it, what would I have to do? I'd have to what? Figure out what this angle is, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so that's a lot of work, and a lot of work that I don't want to mess with, besides the fact that I could get it wrong, okay? It would be easy to get it wrong. All right, so I'm going to undo that back. So we have a command out there that is called the align command. And when you do what I'm talking about, if I move this thing and I rotate it and I also can scale it, that's what's called a transformation. So when you just move it, when we move that object, that's called a translate. When I do this, that's a rotate. And when I scale it, that's a scale. But the command we're talking about here, transformation, is going to do all three of those things for you in one shot. And it'll do it very precisely. And if you use those snaps properly, it'll even make it simpler. So the name of this command is the align command. So under this modify, I think it's hard to bury. I think it's right there. Yes, that's that one. So you open up the little tray, and it's sitting over here. This is the align, and it'll align objects in both 2D or 3-dimensionally. So it's really a cool. So it can do a 2D transformation or a 3D transformation. So let's go ahead and we'll select the align command. So what you do first is select the objects to align, okay? So this is going to be our fixed baseline. So what we're going to do is select that, all right? Once you're done selecting objects, go ahead and hit enter, and it'll prompt you for a first source point. Well, it really doesn't matter what your first source point is, but I'm going to use this guy as my first source point. Make sure that you're using an OSNAP. So if your OSNAP end is not showing up, make sure you're shifting, right-clicking, and grabbing in so you get that green square. Once you see that, left click. So then you'll want to draw a vector from that point to the point you want to take it to. So I am going to use a shift, right-click, mid, and snap it to the midpoint. So it should draw a displacement vector from the end of that to that. Okay, is that working for everybody?
Yeah.
All right, so now we're going to go for a second source point. So I'm going to use the top, or that point of the line, and I'm going to snap it to this one, okay? So those are two displacement vectors that it's going to use to do the displacement, all right? Is that good?
Mm-hmm.
So the next thing it's asking you for is a third source point. Now, if you have a 3-dimensional object in 3D space, you would use this, but ours is a 2-dimensional transformation, so all we have to do is hit enter. And then it'll ask you to scale objects based on the alignment point. So what it's going to say is if this distance is shorter than this distance, it'll scale it up, which you can see that's what it's going to do. So if you don't want it to scale, you say no. If you do want it to scale, you say yes. Now, when you do this, when you hit enter, what you're going to notice is it's going to do the move first and the rotate second. Go ahead and watch mine. Okay, and then go ahead and do yours. Did that work?
Yep.
That is probably one of the best commands out there that it took them a while to bring it out. And it took them a while also to put it on their menu up here. It wasn't up there a couple of releases ago. You had to just type it in if you wanted to do an align. So it's a very, very good command. It's a move, a scale, and a rotate all in one shot. And mathematically, we refer to that as a translate. Does anybody need to see that again?
Yeah, I'll see it again.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and undo, Craig.
Right.
All right. Do you
Cool.
have your picture like that?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to go to the align command,
Yep.
select the align tool, select what we want to align. Now remember, we don't select both of these, okay? Because that one's going to be stationary. So we're going to select this guy, and then when you do that, hit enter.
Gotcha. I think I selected the wrong one last time.
Okay, so now we're going to use source point
Yep.
to destination point. Second source point to second destination point.
Yep.
Should be asking you for a third, but we're not doing a 2D transfer or a 3D, so just hit enter. And this time, if you want, go ahead and hit yes, and it'll scale it as well. So it
Okay.
should make that, the end of that rectangle is now actually sitting on the end of that line.
Yeah. Cool.
That is actually one of the coolest tools out there. And like I said, it really saves you a lot of grief, and it also makes sure that you're correct on things, because it's really easy to blow rotation angles. It's really easy to blow scale factors, and even moves. So you got to be careful on this. If you're using those snaps properly, it's going to be a great way. Okay. Any questions?
Nope.
All right. Well, we're moving along really well. And we got one more we're going to take a look at, and then I'm going to jump into this last assignment with you, and then we'll be done. So, yeah, Aaron, do you have a question?
No, sorry, that was my phone buzzing.
Oh, no problem. I just want to make sure. Okay. All right. So we're going to look at a command called array, and that's guys right here. And if you notice when you open this up, there are 3 types of arrays, and we're going to use 2 of them on the drawing that we're going to be working on tonight. But I'm going to show you all 3 of them because they're all really cool. So you have what's called a rectangular array. Another name for this is what they call a tessellation pattern. But what it's going to do is you're going to start out with one object, such as a square, and you're going to array it, like, say, for instance, if you have tiles on a floor or you have bricks on a wall, these are all things that you could do a rectangular array with. If you have parking lot stripes, you could array with a parking lot. So there's a lot of really cool things that are rectangular arrays, and they're based on a column, this is a column and rows. So it's a column and a row kind of concept. And then you have this guy called a polar array, which allows you to kind of array around like in a circle. So the face of a clock would be an example of a polar array, or like they're showing you here, those little chairs. You're starting out with one chair and they're having you array it around that circle. So your polar array is based on kind of a circle and its radius, even though you really don't truly have to have the circle there. And the path array is somewhat of a new thing. It's actually pretty cool, but it will allow you to follow objects along a spline or a circle or an ellipse. I'm going to show you some pretty cool things about it. To me, it's kind of like a string of beads, and the way they work, it's really an awesome little tool. So we're going to start out with the rectangular array first, and then we're going to go to the polar array and then path. And when AutoCAD, in the early days of AutoCAD, the array command was all at the command line. It was really hard to do. It was really hard to edit. Now they've made it a very nice way of editing and creating it, and it actually generates an array object for you. So by keeping it one array object, then it actually makes the size of your drawing smaller, and it also makes it easier to edit. So what we're going to do this is we're going to delete all of this junk here, okay? And I'm going to do a zoom extents to just kind of increase the size of my screen. So what I want to do is generate a rectangle, and we want to make sure that our rectangle is the right size, okay? So follow with my steps, and we'll just make sure everybody's there. So I'm going to go to the rectangle command, and I'm just going to pick the lower left corner somewhere over here like that. So we're going to be dragging it in this direction, but we're going to be specific with the numbers. So I'm going to type in @ 1, comma 1, okay? So that's going to make it 1 unit in the X, 1 unit in the Y. So at 1 comma 1, I should have a 1-inch square there. If it doesn't look like it's 1 inch by 1 inch, or it doesn't look like a square, then you probably did it wrong, okay? Let's make sure that we're good with that. Anybody having problems with that?
Looks great.
All right, perfect. So we're going to go into the array command. And the reason I wanted to know what this distance was, because when you do the array, if I'm going to have another square over here, I have to know what the distance is across this face, because I have to add that to whatever distance I want it to be offset. So when it talks about the array distance, it's always this distance plus whatever you want the offset to be. Same thing works this way. If I'm going to pop a square up here, it's going to be that distance plus whatever the offset distance is, okay? So we're going to go into the array command here, grab the rectangular array, select your object, and go ahead and hit enter. And it probably automatically just did an array for you. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yep.
So notice you have what's called a context-sensitive editing tab that showed up here that wasn't there before. Once you close this array, it'll disappear, okay? So let's look at this. There's a lot of information here, but most of it's pretty straightforward. So there are things called columns and rows, okay? So columns are this way. There's column 1, column 2, 3, and 4. So notice it tells me I have 4 columns. Everybody see that? And rows are working this way. Row 1, row 2, row 3. And it says I've got 3. So they just have a 4 by 3 array right now that is just, that's your default setting. Okay? Everybody got good with that?
Yep.
Then they have a distance between columns. So notice mine is set to 1.5. So this is 1 unit plus a half. So the spacing here is really a half, but you have to have 1.5, otherwise they would be on top of each other, okay? So also the spacing on the rows, they're going this way, so you can, like that, all right? So let's do this. Let's beef up the columns. I'm gonna go in here and I'm gonna make that 10. Hit enter. And I'm gonna make my rows 5 and hit enter. And I'm going to make the distance between my columns 1.25. And I'm going to make my row spacing 2. Okay. And when you're done then, oh, by the way, notice there's a levels. Does anybody know what that'll do?
No.
That'll give you a 3-dimensional array. So a level would be coming towards you. So you could actually have 3-dimensional arrays. All right, so if we're done with this, go ahead and hit close, and you'll notice there's your array object. It's that hard. Really nice. The thing is, this is all one object, so if you click on it, notice it takes you right back to this, and then you can do any edits that you want to. So primarily, we would just be using the column and the row information. Okay. You can do things like change where your base point is or edit your source object. These things are a little bit tougher to use, and we don't need to know how to do that. Basically, we just need to understand these are columns in this direction, these are rows in this direction, and this is your spacing in rows, spacing in columns. Okay. All right. Any other questions or any questions?
No.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question. How come it went this way? Why didn't it go this way, or potentially that way, or in the southeast direction? Does it always go northeast?
Maybe based on the base point?
Well, not the base point. You're getting close, I think.
Based on the limits?
How about based on distances? So notice this distance of the column is a positive number. So make that a negative number. And notice what it did. It went in that direction. Okay, so if I made them both negatives, notice it'll go southwest. So you can send it in one of 4 directions when you do this, okay, depending on what your values are, okay? Also, another thing that should make sense, you can't have anything other than integers for your columns and rows. So you can't have 10.5 columns or 5.5 rows. It's always got to be 10 or 5 or 1 or whatever, okay? And when you're done, go ahead and we'll hit close. So the only downside to this is if you really, like, say, wanted to bring a line through here and trim this array, it wouldn't let you. So if I tried to trim this array, it won't let me, okay? So as long as it's an array, it's going to remain one object. If you want to blow this thing apart, you can explode it, but you'll kill the array. So if I click on the array, whoops, let's do this. Okay. If you click on this command, explode, and then you select the array and then hit enter, it looks like an array still, but notice it's no longer an array. It's all a bunch of separate objects, okay? So it's really nice to keep it as a functional array, okay? Any questions on that?
Nope.
Okay, so it's a useful command. You're going to have the potential to use it tonight in tonight's lab. We're going to be doing a parking lot with parking stalls. That's a great application of using array in that. It's a good tool. And like I said, they've made it a lot simpler than it used to be. You used to have to do all of that at the command line. It was really hard. You had to really think about things. You don't have to think about it as much. Plus, it never actually converted them into one object. It was always still separate objects. Okay, so let's, we're gonna just delete everything, erase all, twice, okay? So we're gonna take a look at another command now. We're gonna call this the array, which is a polar type. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna have you draw a circle. Don't worry about its size so much. And I want you to draw a line. We're going to snap to the quadrant of that. And I want to bring that straight down. So the easiest way to bring it straight down is hit your F8 function key. And notice it'll only let you go down or up or left or right. So I'm going to just go straight down a certain distance and then go ahead and hit enter. So basically, we just made what looks like a lollipop. So, but we're going to array this little guy, and we're going to do this in terms of what we call a polar array. Okay? How's that going?
Good.
Yep.
All right.
Good.
So, this array, based on a circle, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and select this, and then select that, and then hit enter. So one of the critical things when you do a polar array is to select a base point, because if you don't, it's not going to work right. So I'm going to go ahead and select a base point, hit it there, and then actually, hold on, let me back out of there. Go ahead and hit escape. I think the base point was actually already showing up. All right, go ahead and hit the escape key. All right, let's go back into it. Polar array. Select your objects, hit enter. Actually, I just wanted the center point of the array, not the base point. So just go ahead, you don't even have to pick anything, just go ahead and do it, it's automatic. Make sure you're using an endpoint, and you should see automatically an array pops up for you. So notice this one is a little different. What it's showing you now is the number of items, the angle between, and the angle to fill. So number of items, this is always item 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So your initial object that you created is always part of that numbering. See, that's 6. So the angle between, if we measured the angle between that line and that line, it'd be 60 degrees, 60 degrees, 60 degrees. Angle to fill means you're going to come around an explicit 360. So if you wanted to only do this 180, you could type in 180 and hit enter, and it does half of that. Okay. Notice also that changed the angle between the 360. Okay, is everybody getting that to work?
Yep.
Okay, let's go back to 360 array. Change the number of items, maybe change it up to 10. Notice as you do that, everything changes accordingly. So pretty simple. This one called rotate items as they're arrayed. If you click that off, notice how they look. The lines don't array polarly. Okay, they still array, but they don't do it in a polar fashion. So probably the most common method is to do a rotate objects like that. Once you get your array the way you want it to look, you close it, and there's your array object. And what's kind of nice about this is if you want to move it, you can just move it all as one object to another location. You can make copies. And as far as AutoCAD's concerned, this is one object. Okay, so that's also very nice. Keeps the size of your drawing smaller. Okay. Any questions on that? So we're going to do some mapping, another mapping project tonight, since that's what this class is about. And one of the things we're going to do is draw little tree symbols. And here I'm going to show you a real quick way to draw a tree symbol. So let's try this. Go ahead and I want you to draw a couple of lines. I'm going to have you draw a line. If you're still in ortho, go ahead and turn ortho off. So pick a line like that. We're going to make some branching structures here. So I'm going to snap nearest. And another line nearest. And maybe one more if you want to get another little branch in there. So this makes a really nice little tree symbol. Okay. So you guys have that located, created. I'm going to go in and do an array polar. Select my lines, hit enter. Give it a base point. Notice that doesn't look like a tree, but it's like beef that up, maybe to 10, or maybe even a few more. It starts to look a little bit better like a tree. Get it too much, then it. So those make nice little symbols. Okay. Everybody get the idea?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So one more array. Not that we're going to use it, but I think you might like this one. This is kind of neat. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this guy. So I'm going to use a tool called a spline. So if you would just type in the word spline, S-P-L-I-N-E. You can do this with other types of objects, but this is kind of like a real complex polyline. So you're just going to pick a bunch of points, and you'll notice this guy's got a nice angle. And what it's doing is it's actually generating the spline through the points that you're picking. So it's similar to a polyline, but it's way more complex. Okay? Is that good?
Yeah.
Yep.
So we're going to go in the circle, snap a circle to the end of that thing, and just make him like that. So we're going to go ahead, do what's called a path array. So you select your object to array, that would be my circle, and then hit enter. And then you select your path curve. And notice there's your array. So what's really cool about this is if my spline changes location, it goes with it. Very neat little tool. And you can add the number of segments in there. You can do a lot with this. It's not, to me, it's probably not the type of array you're going to do a lot with, and we're not going to use it. But it's actually an awesome little guy. Okay.
Cool.
We okay with that?
Yep.
All right. So we covered a lot. Let's see if there's any questions before we move on to I'm gonna Anybody think of anything? All right. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead. We're going to take a look at the last assignment. So I did have to break this down into multiple sheets. So I wasn't able to get it into one. I had to make some changes today, and I didn't have a scanner. So unfortunately, you're going to have five PDF files. So let me go to our website real quick. And let's see. I'm going to go into our Blackboard site. Whoops. So you should have under week 5, you should have these group of assignments. So there's the PDF file that has the written information. I'm going to open up all of these. You might want to do that too. I'm going to get the site plan detail. I'm going to get the detail sheet. Building footprint, and the final plat. Okay. Let's start out with what's called the final plat here, okay? Is everybody finding those located?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is kind of going to bring everything together that we talked about. Right? It's going to have layers. It's going to have line types, colors. You're going to be dealing with a unit of a decimal. You're going to be dealing with surveyor's units. So it's really kind of a totally encompassing thing and going to bring it all together. Notice we're going to have a border. We're going to have a title block. Now, no, you're not going to put these dimensions on here, but I just put them on here because this has to be 120 units by 160 units, okay? And then those will be equally divided. You're going to draw this boundary. So that's what they call a phantom line type. We're going to run this boundary around. That's going to be a really important line because that's going to be where everything is referenced. So you're either going to come out from that, offsetting this way, and offsetting this way, or you're going to come in from it, okay, offsetting. We're going to have this thing called a setback line. That's this guy right here, that dashed line, that's a setback line. That's going to impact where the building is located. So that's going to be a critical line. So the important thing is if you screw up this boundary line anyway, everything is going to be off of it, outside or in of it, okay? You're going to build this parking lot. This is a good example of using an array. You're going to actually ultimately build this building. And we're going to have this 4-foot sidewalk that's running around like this. You can do the sidewalk connection. These little trees, these are examples of array symbols. We're going to build these. These are just wide poly lines. And those are just polylines well. So this is what's called a bar scale, okay? So that's kind of what we're going to be looking at. And this thing will be on an 8.5, 11 by 17 size sheet. So if you were plotting this at home, if you don't have 11 by 17 size paper, you'll have to do it a scale to fit. Otherwise, it won't work. Okay. So that's what we're looking at. So let's go to the first sheet here. Okay, first sheet. So in this, it asks you to create this using a lot of the successive commands that we're talking about. And in particular, you'll be doing a lot of offsets, copies, moves, fillets. There's one location where you can do a chamfer. There's a couple of places where you use array, trim and extend. You may or may not have to use rotate. So that's just kind of how you draw. Layers, colors, and line types are also going to be important, as well as geometric snapping. Okay. So the way we start this thing out, you're going to go into the settings and you're going to set up your drawing units to what you see here. Okay, so if we're back in AutoCAD, let me just kill this real quick. How do I set my units?
Type in units.
Yep, you can just type in units. And by default, you're going to be decimal degree. So here's the thing, and we've been doing this quite a bit, so you guys should be getting used to this at this point. We're going to set a decimal degree, but we're going to say that, I'm sorry, decimal units, not degree, but decimal length. You're going to say that 1 decimal unit is 1 foot, okay? So when you see a foot mark on my paper, you're just going to ignore the foot mark, okay? You're just going to assume that 1 unit is 1 foot, all right? So we've done that on a couple of other drawings as well. Now, the one thing that you will need to set up is the angle type, and make sure that you're going to surveyor's units. You don't really have to worry about precision, but I do have you setting it to a higher precision, but it'll take whatever you put in there, okay? And last time we did this on assignment 3, we rotated this because we needed north to go this direction, okay, parallel with X. We're going to leave north straight up, so don't go to direction. Your direction is going to stay to this base angle east, okay? So all you're doing is just setting this up right here, and then you would hit OK. So what that does is it sets it so that AutoCAD thinks north is up, all right? Any questions on that? Hopefully not. Okay, limits. Your limits are going to be 0, 0 to 650, 404. So if we're looking at that paper, I'm getting that off of here. Okay. After you set your limits up, make sure that you do the zoom all, because what that'll do is take your limits and force it into this area right here that you're working in. Okay. So that's also very critical. All right. No questions? Okay, so you're going to have quite a few different objects. They're going to be assigned to their own layer scheme. So we have the border, the boundary, the building, the center line, parking lot, parking spaces, pavement, setback, sidewalk, symbols, and trees. So all of the objects that you see here go on those respective layers. You need to use this color scheme that I'm setting up for you. You're going to have to go out and load line types, phantom, center, hidden, okay? So let's review that real quick. Who can tell me how I load line types or how I create a layer?
Go to layer properties.
Actually, yeah, that's right. It's called layer property. That's actually called the layer manager. Okay, but yeah, you're right. That's what they call it. Okay, and then what do we do?
Hit new layer. It's like the orange button.
Yep, and that just generates a layer. So once you're doing that, you can name these. Like you probably should name them like what I'm calling them, border, boundary. But if you just want to create them real quick, you can just do that and come back and rename them after the fact. Okay? Get your color set up. So follow my color. So for instance, if this is the center line layer, I'm telling you I want that red. So you would come down here and make that red. Okay? So what about line types? Because those are the things that aren't there. So what do we have to do to get those line types set up? Okay, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to load the line types into the drawing. So here's the easiest way to do this. We talked about this last week. If you hadn't had a chance to do that assignment 4, you haven't had a chance to do this yet. So you're going to go to any of those line
Click it.
and click it. Then you right click or go to load. And the easiest thing to do is just load every line type into your drawing. So just come up into this box, right click, select all, hit OK, and then they're loaded into your drawing, and then all of these in there are now there. So if I want to do the center line type, I just grab it, hit OK, and it'll be in there. Okay, so just keep that in mind, because if you haven't loaded line type, you'll just have continuous, and you won't have any way to get them in there. If you'll have to go back and look that up. Okay, so hopefully that'll keep that from happening. I would probably go ahead and set your layers and your colors and your line types up before you start drawing, just in the order that I've given it here. You can also create them, I mean, as you go, but I find it a lot easier to do it that way, okay? So once you have your layers created, you can close that box, and then they'll be active over here for you. So when you want to make one current, you just click on the one you want to make current, and then you can draw and go, okay? And if I get an object on the wrong layer, there's an easy way to move it. Somebody remember how to move it from one layer to another? You just select the object you want to move and then come up here, move it to the layer you want it to go to. Make sure that you deselect it by hitting the escape key, because if he's still active, he can move back to another layer, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing to also remember, all right? Okay, so let's go back to the paper. Let's see. So after I've created these, it says to begin the drawing border, by drawing the border dimensions are going to be equal to the limits. So again, you use a rectangle very nicely. Just use the lower left at 0, 0, upper right at 650, 404. And then I would probably go ahead and do the title block. And that, remember, that's 120 by 60, okay? So that would be the next step, all right? So here's a very important step. Number 6 is we're going to start drawing the boundary, okay? So the boundary has a starting location. It's at the southwest corner of the boundary. The corner is 83,62. And then it says to close the boundary with an arc using the defining radius parameter. And I would say use a fillet. So let me find this sheet I want to go to here. Let's see. Okay, go to the one that's marked site plan. So this has all of your dimensions on it. So this is an important sheet. You're going to start down at this corner. I don't have the coordinates there. I think I've got them on a sheet called detail. But this is the point that has that's the point that's at 83,62. So if you have printed that out, you might want to put a note there. That's actually X and Y is 83,62. And you're going to start drawing this thing probably this way. So I would come up north 5 degrees, 1406 west, 273 feet. And then you're going to come across that bearing and distance. And then you're going to come down to here. So when you get to there, you want to stop. Okay? Then you're going to pick up this point and come across this way. Now, I want you to notice here, it says that it's northwest, but you're actually, if you go northwest from there, it's going to send that line that way. So you actually want to make that, you can make that northeast or southeast, but make sure you're 90 degrees at 270, 80, okay? So you would have a line here with a bearing and distance, a line here with a bearing and distance, that line at bearing and distance, and that line at bearing and distance. So I want to put this arc in with a 50-foot radius, so how would I do that?
Fillet?
Yes, don't do anything other than fill it. If you try to do an arc, you're probably going to blow it, okay? So make sure that you get the boundary correct in terms of bearing and distance, and then come in here and put that 50-foot radius in, okay? Questions on that?
No.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to this assignment sheet. So that is step 6. Step 6 is incredibly important. If you blow the boundary, you've blown everything essentially, okay? So you got to make sure that you get that right. So 7 tells you to create setback lines by offsetting inside the boundary lines using given dimensions. And then you're going to have a parking lot that has an intersection and parking lot detail sheet, and I'll show you how to do that. So let's look at the setback lines first. So the setback, does anybody know what a setback is? Has everybody heard that term before? I might have used it before. Anybody ever heard that term before?
No.
No.
Okay, setbacks have to do with buildings, okay? And if you've ever heard of anything called zoning, zoning dictates how close a building can be to a property or to either a property line or let's say a roadway. And they'll determine that by this process called setback. So what you're going to do is take and offset that line 40 feet. You're going to offset that 40 feet, offset that 40 feet. The top line's 40 feet, but notice that this setback over here is 15, okay? So here again, if you've screwed up the property line, when you do the offset, it's gonna make your setback line wrong, okay? So just again, I'm trying to emphasize that all of the geometry is based on that boundary line, okay? But once you get the offsets in, that should go on that setback goes on its own layer. There's a setback layer, okay? And that's going to dictate where the parking lot starts down at this corner. And it's also going to dictate where this building starts, which is going to be this corner. And I'll explain how you're going to do that here in a minute. So get the setback next, and then we're going to attack the parking lot. So the parking lot is going to start at that corner and it's going to go straight up. Okay, so that's due north. And it tells you that you have 25 parking spaces. So there's another drawing here. Okay, this one that is called your intersection and parking lot detail. So notice this is the corner of where the setbacks intersect, and this is giving you parking lot information. So your spaces are 9 feet apart. They're 18 feet this way. And you have a 24-foot access road and then another 18 feet. So how many spaces did it say you had? I think it was 25. 25. You go back to here, 25 spaces. So you're going to take 9 feet times 25, and that'll tell you the distance that you're going to go from here to here, okay? So you're going to have 9-foot parking spaces, 25 of them. That'll give you this distance. Then you're going to come over 18, 24, and another 18. So once you get this line drawn, then you can just do some offsets, and that'll fix all that up. Okay, is everybody with me on that?
Yeah.
Okay, so you have parking spaces that you can put in. You can either use a bunch of arrays, or I'm sorry, one array. You can array these spaces, which works really nicely, or you can do offsets, whatever works for you. This will be on the parking, I think that's called the parking space layer, and this will be on the parking lot layer. You have a couple of fillets here. So notice there's a 5-foot fillet here and a 25-foot fillet here. So you got your pavement, center line pavement. So you can put all that in. There's a 4-foot sidewalk also here. It's a 4-foot sidewalk. The other end of this, it doesn't show you this, but this is also a 5-foot fillet, okay? So that's a 5-foot fillet radius, 5-foot fillet. 20 feet up, that'll be 20, that's 24 across. Is everybody okay with that now?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so let's go back to here. So drew the border, we drew the setback. Now we're working on the parking lot, okay? So the next thing is to draw the building footprint using the given dimensions. So there is a footprint here. It's 80 feet 3 inches. You got 60 feet 6 inches. All this is around this corner right here where I've got my cursor. That's the corner that is touching the setback line. So in terms of my picture, this thing's rotated 90 degrees, okay? So you're going to have to do one thing on this. You might want to make a note. What I would do is convert these inches into feet, okay? So how do you convert an inch into a foot?
Times 12.
Yes, say that again?
Times 12?
How about divide by 12?
Or divide by 12, yeah.
Okay, so you're going to take 6 divided by 12. That's going to give you a half. So this distance here would be 21.5, okay? If you take 5 and divide it by 12, it's not going to be a pretty number. okay? So what you want to do is make sure that you float these numbers out to like 4 decimal places, okay? So if you get a pure number like 0.5, you're good. But if it's 5 inches, make sure that you go out 4 decimal places. If you don't do that, it's going to give you a little bit of an error, okay? Not a big deal. You're only dealing with the outside lines here, by the way, not the inside, okay? Just the outside. Notice also you don't have this dimension here. You have to figure it out, but it's not tough, okay? But one thing to note, a lot of people make a mistake. This side from here to here is not 60 feet 6 inches because there's a 2-foot jog here. Does everybody see the difference?
Yeah.
So here it's 60 feet 6 inches. Here it's going to be, anybody tell me what that is? This is from that side to that side is 60 feet 6 inches. So from here to here would be what?
62 feet 6 inches.
Exactly. So yeah, so if you take, this will be 60 from that face to that face will be 62 feet 6 inches. So this corner of this wall from here to here would be 62 feet 6 inches minus 21 feet 6 inches. Okay? So make sure you do that right, because a lot of people, they walk over the part that this is like actually 2 feet difference. And then that screws up their building. Okay? Has everybody got that?
Yeah.
Okay, so back to this. What you have to do, you have to find the fact that the building is going to be parallel to the east parking lot line, but it also has to exactly touch the setback line at one unique spot. Okay, so what we're going to do is go back to this picture here. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little hint how you're doing this. What we're saying is this face of the building right here is parallel to that line, okay? That line and that line are parallel. So the easiest way to get this line is to do what? If you've drawn the parking lot already, what's the easiest way to get this line?
Offset.
You just offset it. Now, if you drew the parking lot, if you drew the sidewalk, you're going to offset at 35. If you're drawing it from here, because your sidewalk is a 4-foot walk, it would be 39, okay? So just make sure you get that right. So I have to get this corner, and there is only one unique corner or spot where that will be, okay? So what I need to do is know what the distance is from here to here. We just said what that's going to be, right?
Yep.
That was what?
62.
62?
62, 6.
All right, so you're going to take this line and you're going to offset it, what? 62 feet 6, right? Where
Yep.
that offset line crosses your setback line, that gives you that corner. And then you're going to build the building from that point around, okay? Is everybody with me on that?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the trickiest part of this whole drawing. And a lot of people what people will do is they'll get the building either too high or too low this way, or, below the footprint. So just kind of watch that, all right? So I just told you how to do it, okay? So all you got to do is check that out. So then once you get the building in, you got a 4-foot sidewalk that runs around it. It's going to be an offset of 4 feet and then another offset of 4 feet. You're just going to do that all the way around, okay? Now,
Yep.
I don't have this note on here, so make sure you put a note here for yourself. The center of this walk will be in the midpoint of the building. So the way you want to establish this sidewalk is you want to snap a line from the midpoint of the building line to the perpendicular point on the back of the sidewalk. So again, I'm going to draw a line, snap it mid to this line, perp to the sidewalk line. That's going to give me the center of the sidewalk. So then I'll offset that line 2 and down 2, do a chamfer that's 5 by 5, and you'll have this thing knocked out. Okay?
Yeah.
Is that good?
Yeah.
All right, so that's the hardest part right there, okay? So once you've done that, and that's all explained in 6, 7, and 8, and of course now this is something you'll be able to go back to and look at too, you can reference. Then it asks you to draw the north arrow using given information. Just make sure it's due north. So let me go to the sheet that shows you that. What I'm showing you here is the easiest way to do this is to draw a tapered polyline. So what I'm saying is you can draw a polyline with a value greater than 0 to 0. So you're going to have a ending point or starting point greater than 0, an ending point at 0. It doesn't matter what the length is here, just so it kind of looks representative. And you're going to go up with a straight line, and you can literally take this guy and copy him up. Just make sure that this line from that point up to that point is due north, okay? You don't have to put that north symbol in there, just a circle is all you need, okay? And when you look back, let's see, on our final, notice where I've got it. Okay, so it should be just kind of like that size, okay? This goes on a layer called the symbol layer. Now this one is also, that one is also on a symbol layer, and this is called a bar scale. I don't have that I don't have a way of showing you on that sheet, but let me explain that. This bar scale is set so that if you increase or decrease the size of this drawing when you print it out, that'll increase or decrease with it. So that gives you the ability to lay a scale there and figure out what your scale factor is. So we're going to just draw one. It's not that, it doesn't have to look exactly like mine, but what's critical is that it has to be exactly 20 feet from here to here, 20 feet from there to there. I don't know why that keeps popping up on me. And 20 feet or 40 feet from there to there. So 20 here to here, 20 here to here, 20 here to here. So I would, use those numbers. As far as drawing it this way, I would probably make it 5 units and 5 units. So 10 units tall, split by 5s. And then you can fill those in with wide polylines. That's a wide polyline, and that's a wide polyline. So that's the easiest way to make that, okay? Any questions on that?
No.
Okay. You might have some questions, and seriously, guys, all you have to do is contact me, and I can do a Zoom session with anybody if they need help. Okay, so that won't be a problem. So, then it asks you to do trees, and you can place them anywhere you want. I want 2 styles, your choice. You're going to use a polar array. You create one, and then you just move it and copy it around. I don't care where they go, quite frankly. But I want 2 styles, one like that, one like, it doesn't have to look like that, just similar. And the sizes can be anything, just kind of put them around, but don't put them like in the parking lot or something that wouldn't make sense. Just put them like where they would make sense. And they have a layer for the trees, and they will be, let's see, just make sure you have the same number of trees. I think there's 11 trees here, okay? Just make sure you count them, all right?
Yeah.
And then set your line type scale to 20. So if you don't do that, you probably won't see your line types. So all you have to do is type in AutoCAD. You just go back here. You just type in LTS, and then you type it 20 and hit enter, and your line types should show up. Notice my line type just showed up when I did that. Okay. You can actually set your line type scale up before you start drawing. So you don't have to do that as the last step. It just depends, okay? So you probably won't see your line types until you do that, all right? Okay, any questions on that?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so once you've completed that, you'll just save it and you will send me the digital file, the DWG. So if you were plotting this, you would plot this at 11 by 17 and you would use a 40 scale. So if anybody does have a plotter and wants to plot this at home, if you have, or a printer, if you have 11 by 17 size stock paper in it, which most people don't, but if you do, you have to do it at a 40. If you want to plot it though to look at it, which I would suggest if you've got a printer, just plot it scale to fit. And you do it on a an 8.5 by 11 scale to fit. And that way you can get a good look at it. And I always like doing that because you always catch things that you don't see other way, okay? So that's what we're going to be looking at, and there's a lot to do on this. It brings it all together. It seems like an overwhelming amount of work, and it takes a while, but think once you get through this, you'll really understand kind of how all of this plays out. And as you start to get into the GIS stuff, you're going to see, you know, basically they're using mapping tools, which we're doing kind of by scratch. Okay, so that's our, let's see, there's our final picture. So that's what we're going to be looking at. Okay, and when you do set your scale factor up on your line types, this is what you should see. Okay, so that's edge of pavement, that's an edge of pavement, center line, edge of pavement, property, setback, edge of pavement, center line, edge of pavement, property line, setback. Okay, that's kind of how that's working. All right, let's go back to AutoCAD, see if there's any questions that anybody might have. That anybody can think of right now. No questions? Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording.